One of these common subjects you talked about was going towards a common language, having English now as a dominant language, and questioning whether or not it's a very equal way of communication, having English and a pure form of English as a lingua franca. My question here is, do we need a common language in times where there are more and more quite good, free, available tools or tools that translate immediately online or with devices, and I think there's this process where it's going quicker and quicker, and where you see there's a bigger accuracy within time, where there is no dominance between the languages, and even people who are, for example, analphabetic can join in the conversation. So I don't know if one of you feels...
Actually looked into that, of course. If you look at, there's a project where I try to automate certain processes that happen as I produced the film, and we were looking at extraction of rules, so not extraction of words, but extraction of rules. And it's like you parse the language, and Google Translate is also really looking at ways to kind of analyze language construction through parsing, and this process is very difficult. But it also means that you need, like with any artificial intelligence, because that's what it's doing, you need to have a lot of source material, and at the moment still, also in parsing and in automatic translation, a lot of except for some big languages, everything goes through English. So if I translate between Dutch and, say, Japanese, English is in between there. So you cannot say that English is absent in those processes. And there is not currently, that I know of, any other country with any other language that is trying to do this artificial intelligence process in another language. There might be, but I don't know of it. So I would say these machines actually also enlarge the hegemony of English in many ways. So I don't see them as the main solution. They can be a temporary solution.
Yeah, I think it's essential to make a distinction between the written word and the spoken word. I think that there is a lot of potential for artificial intelligence, and already a lot of progress has been made for the written word. That is, you have something that is unambiguous, that's there on the computer, and then you have, I mean, with the acumen of good translators, but also with a massive database, not yet corrupted by the machine translation. So you need a good database. You can really improve things, and improve things in all directions for all combinations. So for example, Google Translate made in the case of translation to and fro, to and from English, made a big jump about 2 years ago, and that was a great improvement. For the other combinations of languages, it was much poor, and some other things like DeepL are doing better at this. But so I think there are further possibilities in this direction, and it's very important also because given that the written press is more and more online, if you can use more and more of these good softwares, you'll be able to access things in any language, even the minority languages, in a fairly accurate way. But I don't believe in it for the spoken word, as your compatriot Abraham de Swan once said. Yes, of course, it will be possible to machine translate what people say in the spoken word. That is when people will have learned to speak like machines. Yeah. And so at the moment, so there is something developed, and so a sort of real incarnation of what was the Babel fish of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There is something developed by Google called Pixel Buds, which is meant to be for the spoken word, so I try to make some demonstration of it, but it's really a sequence of 6 different softwares. And the first software has to try to make a distinction between noise and sound. And then you have the sound, you have to try to identify the language. And then once you identify the language, then you have a number of usual processes. But of course, any mistake made at any stage is fatal for the rest of the story. And also because of the complexity of the databases we have to use, you must be online in order to so if suddenly the network breaks down, you are without. So that a conclusion is that I believe that we can do away with English. We don't need English for the written word. We'll need it less and less, but it's absolutely essential for the spoken word. And we need to be able to speak with each other in a way that's intelligible to each other, which was not always the case, I must say, when I tried to figure out what was being said.
So that they were intelligible to each other,
yeah,
which is an important, but not to us. Yeah. That's a different story.
I think you touched something there that Sophie also was talking about when you said it would be good for the spoken word once we learn how to talk like machines. I think that's also what you talked about, talking about the importance of in between the lines and in between the spaces.
I was going to say my response would actually be very different to both of your answers to that. But that's also probably because I'm coming from a country where English is the hegemonic language, and so from my perspective, I'm interested in trying to undermine that hegemony and trying to find a space where you don't need that single language to be able to create a culture that can empathize with one another without necessarily being able to understand one another. And I think, I really appreciate having grown up in London where, yes, we all spoke English at school, but as soon as I was at any one of my friends' houses, the whole household was either speaking Gujarati or Turkish or Greek or any number of any other languages. And so what I found interesting watching that film is that, that I feel very comfortable in being in that in-between space of not understanding everything. And I think that that's a healthy and good place to be, is always attempting to understand one another, but also not needing to. There being the space for that freedom of being able to empathize and understand each other in a way that's not linguistic.
And do you think that there lies a possibility of creating an equal and common language by starting to try to understand each other in between the lines?
I think that that's what art is always trying to do. Mm-hmm. That's the space of artistic production, of not being didactic and not being, concluded and static, but being a space where, the artist puts something out into the world, but the viewer is going to receive it in their own nuanced way. And so it's always a space. And I think also, even if you are speaking the same language, there's the interpersonal perception of that as well. That we, even if we're speaking the same language, even if we're both speaking our mother tongue, sharing the same mother tongue, you can never really completely understand what the other's thinking. And so, I think there's something messy in between there anyway. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I agree, but also I don't want to romanticize, I don't say you romanticize, but I don't want to make it nicer than it is in a way. When we talk about mother tongues, for example, when we talk about Dutch, the Constitution of the Netherlands is written in Dutch. And so you need to master the language in order to empower yourself within that system. And the same is, in a way, with English. We also, it's useful to know English because you have to kind of, I don't know the English word for this, weapon yourself, get ready to empower yourself. So it's by no means that it's just, English is by no means just a method or a mode of communication. It is much more than that. I'm very aware of that, and I would also say that the number of people currently speaking English, it is kind of a miracle that it's not has more varieties than it already has. But that is to do also with the fact that English has another function as well. I think you also write that for every new speaker of a dominant language, that the top speaker profits. So it can only go, if I didn't misread you, so it can only go stronger. So what I would really like, and the arts are a perfect place to claim that, is to say let's hurry up with modification. Let's co-opt it, but hurry up with it. And in the meantime, not forget that there is the written word, and the laws are written in a certain language too.
So I was really I found much of what you said, what you as an introduction to your film, very congenial. Of course, there is something happening with English which is analogous to what happened to Latin. That is such a differentiation that you may lose mutual intelligibility. And it struck me, for example, when you go to Nigeria and you talk to people, you understand what they say. But when they speak to each other in English, you are completely lost. And that is because there is always the constraint which you impose on yourself in the light of who you are trying to talk to. And so you use a sort of more standard form in order to be understood by a Belgian who happens to visit you, and you don't, whereas for other people. And so the constraint of intelligibility, of course, now across oceans, not just across villages, because of the new media, have prevented so far English from differentiating as much as Latin did. Something else which I was reading, which is related also to hegemony and all the rest, which I think is extremely important, is that our attitude towards English should really be completely décomplexé. English is our language. It's not the exclusive property of the people who happen to be called native languages. So we'll jolly well speak it with our variety of accents without being ashamed of it. We can calmly reclaim it as our language. So some of you compatriots said, we want our country back. Well, we want our language back. This language which we continental Europeans imposed on the poor British population, the Germanic component in the 5th century, through a first invasion, and then a second invasion where some Scandinavians had gone to a language course in Normandy for about a century. When they were ready for it, they crossed the channel again to go and graft onto the Germanic component, the French component. And so we have this continental language that has been kindly lent to the Brits, which they've improved in some way. They sing beautiful, the American beautiful songs and so on. And now we must say more than ever, English is our language. Give us our language back. But the Brits can keep it. They can keep speaking it without...
On that note, I would like to ask the audience if they have some questions for us. Yes.
Thank you for the interventions. They are very interesting. Certainly, to have
It sounds like a beautiful Italian variety of English. Or?
No, this is exactly not what I'm going to do.
Sorry. Thank you. Is it working? No. Yeah, thank you for the intervention. Very interesting. It's certainly that to have a lingua franca to communicate in our daily basis is very important. I have a question to Philippe. Actually, originally from Colombia. I've been living in Belgium 15 years already. It's been very interesting the way you draw the landscape of the actuality in Belgium. And the question will deal with education according to language, or learning a new language, because it's not language just doesn't help you to communicate in your daily basis, but when you learn a new language, you also need to get into the culture you are living in or within. How do you see the differences in the education system in Flanders and in Wallonia? Because in my own experience, I'm learning Dutch, and being living in Belgium, I have to pass through a certain moment a cultural integration program, which means not just learning the language, but also learning how to behave within the language. Do you see the same in Wallonia? I mean, what will happen in this panorama of splitting a country? How do you see educational system in Flanders? How, if you know how address, for instance, that system, how we understand the other, or who is the other, how the curiosity for kids, for instance, at the school is, are they learning to get other cultures, or is something that just English will give them in their lives, to just the curiosity to get to know the other and communicate?
Okay, many things in your question, so I'll answer probably only partly to it. One, I think learning a language, of course, is often associated as a precondition for it, but also as an incentive to learning the culture of the people whose language it is as a native language. And I think that's important in the case of inburgering. When you go and settle somewhere, I think it's very important to learn the local language. I'm in favor of the so-called linguistic territoriality principle, that the people who settle somewhere can reasonably be expected to have both the courage and the humility to learn the local language. So I'm in favor of that. I'm in favor of that in Flanders, in favor of that in Wallonia, in favor of that all over the world. And that is, and because it's a condition for the access to the local culture in the broader sense, not just the high culture, but just being able to talk with other people and understand how they behave, why they behave the way they behave, not necessarily to adopt every feature of how they behave. But I would make a distinction with our learning of English as a lingua franca. Our learning of English has nothing to do with Shakespeare. It's not, we couldn't give a damn about Shakespeare. And we don't need to, because, and please, we should stop associating English with the Union Jack, with the British flag. This is nonsense. It's still on many websites. So English is just an instrument for us to understand each other as well as possible. And we need to understand this more than by gestures, etc., because we need to take decisions together. We need to understand each other's arguments. And so that's why we need English. And so in Belgium, in the Belgian context, so we have these different languages, and so some regions will try to make sure that in the inburgering, the integration more will go into people's heads than just the language. And I think some of it is justified, some of it is over the top.
I think everyone is getting quite hungry. We are a little late, but we have 55 minutes to eat something. So I would like to have a warm applause for the speakers.